Hello there, and welcome to Sleep Science, where we explore fascinating science in a quiet, relaxing way that helps your mind unwind and drift off to sleep. Tonight, we're venturing into a world so small you can't see it, yet so vast it shapes every breath you take. We'll meet the deadliest entity on our planet, a tiny virus that's been waging war for billions of years, killing trillions every single day. But here's the gentle twist that makes this story so remarkable. This microscopic warrior might just become medicine's greatest ally. Before we begin tonight's peaceful journey into the realm of bacteriophages, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. It's always wonderful to know where these quiet little science stories are drifting off to. There's no need to follow every detail tonight, no equations to memorize or facts to retain. Just let these tiny tales of molecular drama wash over you like gentle waves, carrying you toward rest while filling your mind with wonder. So settle in, close your eyes if you like, and let's take a slow, curious wander into the extraordinary world of the bacteriophage, where the smallest actors perform the greatest dramas. Right now, as you're listening to these words, a war is raging on your skin. It's happening on your hands, between your fingers, on your eyelids, even in the spaces between your teeth. Billions of tiny soldiers are locked in combat, hunting and destroying their enemies with precision that would make any military strategist weep with envy. The battlefield is everywhere life exists. In the deepest ocean trenches where no sunlight has ever penetrated, in your morning coffee cup as it cools beside your bed, floating through the air you breathe, swimming in every drop of water that has ever existed. This war has been going on for billions of years, long before the first flower bloomed or the first bird learned to sing. It predates dinosaurs, mountains, and even the oxygen in our atmosphere. When the Earth was still a molten ball of rock and metal, when the surface was too hot for liquid water, the genetic ancestors of these warriors were already preparing for battle. Every single day, this conflict claims more lives than every human war combined, yet it unfolds in complete silence, invisible to our eyes, a drama of such magnitude that it defies comprehension. The warriors in this ancient battle are so impossibly small that millions could dance on the head of a pin, each one performing its deadly choreography in perfect synchronization with countless others. They're not quite alive in the way we understand life, not quite dead in any sense we can grasp, existing instead in that mysterious space between chemistry and biology, where the laws of physics and the mysteries of existence intersect in ways that still puzzle scientists. These soldiers have no consciousness, no feelings, no grand strategies plotted in war rooms or debated by generals. They don't experience fear or courage, anger or satisfaction. They don't mourn their fallen comrades or celebrate their victories. They simply do what 4 billion years of evolution has designed them to do: hunt, kill, and multiply with mechanical precision and ruthless efficiency. But here's what makes this war so remarkable, so quietly beautiful despite its violence. It's not random destruction or meaningless carnage. Every battle is precise, elegant, almost surgical in its execution. Each warrior is designed to hunt only one specific enemy, like a key crafted to fit only one lock in all the universe. When they find their target, the battle is swift and decisive, but when they encounter anything else, they drift past like ships passing in the night, utterly indifferent to potential victims that don't match their exact specifications. You might imagine such a war would be terrifying, and in some ways it is. The scale of death is staggering, the efficiency of killing breathtaking, the relentless nature of the conflict almost overwhelming to contemplate. Yet there's also something deeply peaceful about it, something that speaks to the profound order underlying all of nature's apparent chaos. This invisible conflict maintains a delicate balance that allows life as we know it to exist and flourish. Without this war, our world would be a very different place indeed. The oceans would be thick with bacteria, choking out other forms of life. The soil beneath our feet would be dominated by single bacterial species that had overwhelmed all competition. The very air we breathe would be different, the cycles that maintain our planet's habitability disrupted beyond recognition. Instead, this ancient war maintains equilibrium, preventing any single form of life from becoming too dominant, ensuring diversity, promoting the kind of evolutionary innovation that has given rise to every beautiful and complex creature we see around us. It's nature's way of keeping house, of maintaining the conditions that allow forests to grow, flowers to bloom, and humans to exist. The combatants themselves are marvels of engineering that put our most sophisticated technologies to shame. They're built from the same fundamental materials as everything else in the universe, carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen, yet they're assembled with such precision that each one functions like a molecular machine designed for a single, specific purpose. So let's drift deeper into this microscopic realm, where the smallest players wage the biggest battles, where something deadly might just hold the key to healing, where 4 billion years of evolution has crafted warriors so perfect in their lethality that they've become indispensable to the continuation of life itself. Picture, if you will, a creature that looks like it was designed by someone with a vivid imagination and a deep love for geometric puzzles. The bacteriophage, or phage for short, resembles nothing so much as a tiny lunar lander that has been crossed with a medieval mace and then shrunk down to dimensions that challenge the very limits of existence. It's a structure so impossibly small that if you could line them up side by side, it would take about 50 million of them to span the width of a human hair. Yet, each one is crafted with precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker abandon their craft in despair. The head of a phage is shaped like an icosahedron, one of the most beautiful and mathematically perfect forms in all of geometry. This 20-faced crystal, each face a perfect triangle, isn't just aesthetically pleasing to those who appreciate mathematical beauty. It represents the most efficient possible way to pack genetic material into the smallest conceivable space. Every angle has been optimized by billions of years of evolution, every surface refined to perfection. Imagine holding a jewel so perfectly cut that light seems to dance across its faces in impossible ways, and you'll have some sense of the geometric elegance of a phage head. But this isn't just beauty for its own sake. This is engineering at its most sublime. The icosahedral structure provides maximum internal volume while using the minimum amount of building material, the same principle that makes soap bubbles round and honeycomb cells hexagonal. Nature, it seems, has always been an excellent mathematician. Attached to this crystalline head is often a long, elegant tail that can extend the total length of the virus by several times. This tail isn't merely decorative, it's a marvel of microscopic engineering that serves multiple crucial functions. Some tails are short and stubby, like tiny pistons designed for delivering powerful, concentrated force. Others are long and graceful, like microscopic spears built for precision rather than power. Each design is perfectly adapted to its intended target, refined over countless generations to achieve maximum effectiveness. At the end of this tail, arranged like the legs of some impossible spider, are the tail fibers, structures so delicate and sophisticated they almost seem to belong in the realm of fantasy rather than biology. These aren't legs at all, but incredibly advanced molecular tools, each one precisely engineered for a very specific job. They function as sensory organs, grappling hooks, and precision instruments, all rolled into one impossibly small package. Phages are viruses, which puts them in that curious category of things that challenge our very definition of what it means to be alive. They can't eat in any sense we understand, have no way to breathe or metabolize nutrients, cannot reproduce without help from other organisms. They have no heartbeat, no circulation, no awareness of their surroundings in any conventional sense. They don't grow or age or learn from experience. In many ways, they're more like extremely sophisticated molecular machines than living creatures, yet they possess a kind of purposefulness that seems almost intentional. When a phage is not actively engaged in the process of infection, it exists in a state that scientists sometimes call dormancy, though it's more like a kind of molecular suspension. It drifts through its environment like a tiny seed waiting for the right conditions to sprout, completely inert, yet somehow ready to spring into action the moment it encounters its target. It's neither alive nor dead, but something else entirely, a state of existence that doesn't fit neatly into our usual categories. Yet when a phage encounters its chosen prey, it undergoes a transformation that is both instantaneous and profound. Every component springs into action with clockwork precision, every movement calculated and purposeful. It's as if nature took billions of years to perfect the art of microscopic warfare and created these tiny masterpieces as the ultimate expression of evolutionary engineering. There are more phages on Earth than every other organism combined, a fact so staggering it's difficult to process. More than all the bacteria, more than all the plants, more than all the animals, more than all the fungi. They outnumber the stars in the observable universe by factors that require scientific notation to express. They exist in such abundance that if you could somehow gather them all together, their collective mass would dwarf mountains, yet individually they remain invisible, ghostly presences that shape our world in ways we're only beginning to understand. They're likely present in every environment where life exists, in every drop of seawater, every grain of soil, every breath of air, every surface you touch throughout the day. They drift through clouds, settle in snow, circulate through groundwater, and travel on every wind that blows across the planet. They've been to the bottom of the deepest ocean trenches and the tops of the highest mountains, carried by currents and creatures to every corner of the earth. And yet, for all their abundance and seemingly universal presence, phages live by a simple rule that shapes everything they do. They're remarkably picky eaters. Each type of phage has usually chosen one specific bacteria to hunt, sometimes just a few very close relatives. It's like having millions of highly trained specialists, each one capable of eliminating only members of one very particular family. This specificity is both their greatest strength and their most elegant limitation, a constraint that makes their deadly precision possible. Let's take a moment to admire the quiet engineering marvel that is a bacteriophage, to really appreciate the extraordinary elegance of destruction when it's been perfected over billions of years. Imagine holding in your hands a structure so perfectly designed that every angle, every surface, every microscopic attachment point serves a specific function, where nothing is wasted and everything contributes to the whole. The head of a phage is essentially a tiny molecular safe, designed to protect the most precious cargo in the viral world: genetic information. But this isn't random DNA floating about like loose papers in a briefcase. It's a carefully crafted instruction manual for making more phages, compressed and organized with efficiency that would make computer programmers weep with envy. The icosahedral shape of the head isn't just mathematically beautiful, it's the solution to an engineering problem that has challenged architects and engineers throughout human history. How do you create the largest possible internal volume while using the least amount of building material? How do you make something both incredibly strong and remarkably lightweight? The answer, it turns out, was discovered by viruses billions of years before humans even existed. Consider the incredible forces at work inside a phage head. The genetic material is packed so tightly that the internal pressure is enormous, like trying to stuff a sleeping bag back into its carrying case after it's been unpacked. The protein shell must be strong enough to contain this pressure while remaining flexible enough to release its contents when the time is right. It's a balancing act that requires precision at the molecular level, where the difference between success and failure is measured in the placement of individual atoms. The construction of this tiny fortress follows principles that human engineers are only now beginning to understand and appreciate. Each face of the icosahedron is built from identical protein subunits that lock together like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle. These proteins don't need rivets or welding or any external fastening. They simply fold into shapes that naturally attract and hold on to their neighbors, creating structures that are both incredibly strong and surprisingly elastic. But the head, magnificent as it is only one component of a larger masterpiece. The tail, when present, represents perhaps the most sophisticated piece of microscopic machinery ever discovered. It functions simultaneously as a measuring stick, a drill, a syringe, and a delivery system, all rolled into one structure so small it challenges our ability to comprehend its scale. Some phage tails are marvels of mechanical engineering, with internal springs and pistons that would impress any clockmaker. They can compress and extend, building up pressure, and then releasing it with explosive force. The precision required for this mechanism to work is staggering. If any component is even slightly out of alignment, the entire system fails. Yet these molecular machines are assembled not in factories with quality control inspectors, but through the chaotic dance of thermal motion, with individual proteins finding each other and clicking into place like pieces of a puzzle that assembles itself. The tail fibers, those leg-like appendages that extend from the tail's tip, are perhaps the most remarkable components of all. They function as both sensory organs and grappling hooks, capable of recognizing specific molecular patterns on bacterial surfaces with accuracy that puts our most sensitive instruments to shame. Each fiber is essentially a molecular hand, complete with fingers that can feel their way across bacterial surfaces, searching for exactly the right combination of chemical signals. The sophistication of this recognition system is breathtaking. The tail fibers can distinguish between bacteria that differ by only tiny variations in their surface molecules, like being able to identify a specific person in a crowd of billions based solely on the pattern of freckles on their left earlobe. This selectivity isn't accidental. It's the result of countless generations of evolutionary refinement, each one more precise than the last. When the tail fibers find their target, they don't simply grab on and hold tight. Instead, they initiate a complex sequence of molecular events that transforms the phage from a passive drifter into an active predator. The binding triggers conformational changes throughout the viral structure, like pulling one thread in a sweater and watching the entire garment reshape itself. At the very tip of many tails sits what scientists have charmingly named the tail spike, though it functions more like a molecular drill than any weapon you might imagine. This structure can punch through bacterial cell walls with surgical precision, creating holes that are exactly the right size for the phage's genetic material to pass through. Too small, and the DNA can't fit. Too large, and the cellular contents leak out before the virus can establish control. The drilling process itself is a marvel of biochemical engineering. The tail spike doesn't simply bash its way through the bacterial wall like a battering ram. Instead, it uses specific enzymes to cut precise molecular bonds, dismantling the wall one chemical link at a time. It's like having a key that doesn't just fit the lock, but actually rebuilds the lock mechanism to ensure perfect access. All of this remarkable machinery operates without any conscious control or external guidance. There are no computers running programs, no operators making decisions, no quality control systems checking for errors. It's all accomplished through the fundamental forces of chemistry and physics, molecules bumping into each other and reacting according to laws that have governed the universe since its beginning. Yet the result is so elegant, so purposeful, so precisely orchestrated that it seems almost choreographed by some invisible hand. These molecular machines work with reliability that puts human technology to shame, carrying out their functions billions of times per day with error rates so low they're almost immeasurable. Imagine a world where every step you take, every movement you make, might bring you face to face with a perfectly designed predator that has been evolving specifically to hunt creatures like you for billions of years. For bacteria, this isn't imagination or some distant nightmare. It's the simple, unavoidable reality of existence. They drift through their liquid worlds, swimming through droplets of water or films of moisture, busily going about their bacterial business of finding nutrients, growing and reproducing, completely unaware that invisible hunters are constantly searching for them with patience that spans geological ages. The hunt begins not with drama or fanfare, not with the thunderous charge of cavalry or the stealthy approach of apex predators, but with something far more subtle, the gentle, eternal randomness of molecular motion. In the microscopic world, nothing moves in straight lines or follows predictable paths. Instead, everything dances to the rhythm of thermal energy, jiggling and bouncing in patterns that seem chaotic, but follow deep mathematical laws. Phages don't actively chase their prey in any sense we would recognize as hunting. They can't swim or crawl or fly through their environment under their own power. They have no muscles to propel them, no fins to steer with, no eyes to see their targets from a distance. Instead, they drift through their liquid worlds like microscopic tumbleweeds, carried by currents too small to measure, pushed by vibrations too faint to detect, moving in response to forces that operate below the threshold of human perception. It's a patient kind of hunting, one that relies not on speed or stealth or clever strategies, but on time and probability and the simple mathematics of large numbers. In a world where billions of hunters and billions of potential victims are constantly in motion, random encounters become not just possible but inevitable. It's like playing a lottery where the odds of winning are astronomical, but tickets are being drawn millions of times per second across countless different games. But when a phage does encounter a potential target, when random motion brings these two microscopic entities close enough for their molecular surfaces to interact, something beautiful and terrible begins to unfold. The collision isn't violent in any physical sense. There's no crashing or slamming or dramatic impact. Instead, it's more like two dancers meeting on a ballroom floor, their movements suddenly becoming coordinated as they begin to respond to each other's presence. Those delicate tail fibers we've admired begin to explore the bacterial surface like a blind person reading Braille, but with sensitivity that puts human touch to shame. They're searching for specific molecular patterns, unique chemical signatures that identify their chosen prey as surely as fingerprints or DNA analysis. Each fiber moves independently, probing and testing and analyzing the molecular landscape it encounters. Most of the time, far more often than not, the phage will discover that it has bumped into the wrong bacterium entirely. The surface molecules don't match the patterns encoded in the viral recognition systems. The chemical signals are all wrong, like trying to start a car with a house key or unlock a phone with someone else's fingerprint. When this happens, the phage simply drifts away, its tail fibers retracting, its molecular machinery powering down, continuing its endless search through the microscopic wilderness. But occasionally, rarely, with odds that seem impossibly small, yet somehow manage to work out through sheer persistence and the vast scale of the microscopic world, those questing tail fibers find exactly what they're looking for. The molecular locks click open with satisfying precision. Chemical bonds form with the reliability of sunset, and the phage attaches itself to the bacterial surface with strength that suddenly seems impossible to break. This moment of recognition, when predator meets its perfect prey, is both intimate and impersonal, specific and universal. It happens according to rules that were written in the language of chemistry billions of years before consciousness existed, yet it unfolds with drama that would make any storyteller proud. The phage has found not just any bacterium, but its bacterium, the one organism in all the world that it was designed to hunt. Once attached, there's no escape for the bacterium, no last-minute reprieve or sudden rescue. Its fate is sealed not by cruelty or malice, but by chemistry and time, and the simple fact that evolution has spent eons perfecting this moment. The bacterium may continue its normal activities for a little while longer, unaware that its cellular machinery is about to be commandeered for purposes it never evolved to serve. The attachment process itself is remarkably gentle at first, like a handshake between old friends rather than the grip of a deadly predator. The phage doesn't immediately attack or begin its destructive work. Instead, it takes time to ensure it has made the right choice, to double-check its molecular identification systems, to confirm that this is indeed the target it has been programmed to seek. This moment of confirmation is crucial because once the phage commits to infection, there's no turning back for either participant in this molecular drama. The virus will either succeed in reproducing itself or fail completely. There's no middle ground, no partial victory, no opportunity to try again. The bacterium will either resist the invasion and survive, or succumb completely and be transformed into a factory for producing more viruses. This moment of recognition and attachment, this microscopic meeting of predator and prey, happens millions of times every second in every environment on Earth. It's occurring right now in the soil beneath your feet, in the air around you, in the water you drink, perhaps even on the surface of your skin. Each encounter is a tiny drama played out on a molecular stage, with consequences that ripple through entire ecosystems in ways we're only beginning to understand. What happens next is both brutal and elegant, like watching a master craftsman at work, if that craftsman happened to specialize in the art of cellular conquest and molecular manipulation. Once the phage has confirmed its target and locked onto the bacterial surface with bonds strong enough to resist the constant thermal motion that shakes everything in the microscopic world, it begins what can only be described as the most sophisticated injection process ever devised by evolution. The precision of this procedure makes our most advanced medical syringes look clumsy by comparison, and the efficiency of the delivery system puts our best drug delivery technologies to shame. The phage contracts its tail like a tiny hydraulic piston, but this isn't a simple mechanical process like operating a bicycle pump or squeezing a tube of toothpaste. Instead, it's a carefully orchestrated molecular ballet where proteins change shape in precise sequence, creating pressure that builds gradually and then releases all at once. The viral DNA, compressed and coiled like a spring under enormous tension, is forced through the hole the tail spike has drilled in the bacterial wall. Picture trying to squeeze a garden hose through a pinhole, and you'll have some sense of the geometric impossibility of what's happening. The genetic material must somehow fit through an opening that seems far too small to accommodate it, Yet evolution has found ways to make this work through mechanisms that still amaze scientists who study them. The DNA doesn't just flow through like water, it's actively pumped, pushed, and pulled by molecular motors so small they operate one molecule at a time. The process takes mere seconds, but in those seconds, the entire genetic blueprint for making new phages transfers from the viral head into the bacterial cell. It's like downloading the complete plans for a factory along with all the instructions for building the products that factory will produce, except it's happening through a hole smaller than the wavelength of visible light. The bacterium, at this point, has no idea that its world has just been turned upside down. It continues its normal activities with the dedication of a worker who hasn't yet heard that the company has been sold and the new owners have very different plans. The bacterial cell keeps absorbing nutrients from its environment, keeps maintaining its cellular machinery, keeps preparing to divide and reproduce, blissfully unaware that it has just been reprogrammed for an entirely different purpose. The viral DNA, now floating freely inside the bacterial cell like a new set of instructions that have been quietly slipped into the factory manual, begins to work its molecular magic with subtlety that would impress any spy or saboteur. It doesn't announce its presence with fanfare or immediately seize control of the cellular machinery. Instead, it integrates itself into the bacterial system so smoothly that the transition is almost invisible. It's rather like a computer virus taking over a computer, except this analogy barely captures the elegance of what's actually happening. These are real, physical molecules interacting according to chemical laws that have governed matter since the universe began. The viral genetic material doesn't simply issue commands. It becomes part of the cellular conversation, speaking the same molecular language as the bacterial genes, but gradually changing the subject of that conversation. The bacterial ribosomes, those molecular factories that normally spend their time manufacturing proteins the bacterium needs to survive and grow, begin to encounter new instructions. At first, these might seem like minor modifications to their usual work, subtle changes that don't dramatically alter the cellular routine. But gradually, inexorably, the balance shifts as more and more of the cellular resources are diverted to viral production. Within minutes, the bacterium has become something it never evolved to be, a phage factory operating at maximum efficiency. It's no longer living for itself, no longer working toward its own survival and reproduction. Every ribosome, every enzyme, every metabolic pathway has been co-opted into the service of viral multiplication. The cell has become a hollow shell, maintaining the appearance of normal bacterial life while serving an entirely different master. This process is strangely methodical and systematic, lacking any of the chaos or violence we might associate with conquest. The phage doesn't simply destroy everything in sight like a molecular hurricane. Instead, it carefully orchestrates the construction of its offspring with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. Each new viral component must be built to exact specifications, with every protein properly folded, every piece of genetic material correctly packaged. The quality control happening inside the infected bacterium is remarkable. Somehow, without any external oversight or inspection systems, the viral production line maintains standards that would make human manufacturers envious. Defective components are recognized and discarded, assembly errors are detected and corrected, and the final products emerge with reliability that approaches perfection. The bacterium, meanwhile, continues to function as a living cell, but it's essentially become a biological puppet dancing to genetic strings it cannot see or understand. Its own needs are systematically ignored as every available resource is channeled into viral production. It's a slow, methodical consumption from the inside out, invisible to any external observer, inexorable in its progression toward a predetermined end. And through it all, The bacterium has no defense, no way to call for help, no emergency systems that can respond to this particular kind of threat. Its cellular security systems, evolved to deal with more conventional dangers, are completely unprepared for an invasion that speaks their own language and follows their own rules while serving entirely foreign purposes. The end, when it finally comes, arrives with sudden and spectacular violence that contrasts sharply with the methodical patience that has characterized everything up to this point. After the bacterial cell has been thoroughly transformed into a viral production facility, working tirelessly and without complaint to create dozens or sometimes hundreds of new phages, each one a perfect replica of the original invader, a final signal echoes through the cellular machinery. It's time for the grand finale, the dramatic conclusion to this molecular drama that has been building tension for what seems like an eternity in bacterial terms, but amounts to mere minutes in our human timescale. The newly manufactured phages, still trapped inside the bacterial cell that created them, begin to produce a special enzyme with a name that perfectly captures its function: endolysin. This remarkable molecule is essentially a molecular battering ram, designed with single-minded purpose to accomplish one specific task: the complete destruction of bacterial cell walls. It's a protein key designed to unlock the ultimate lock, the final barrier that stands between the viral offspring and their freedom. The bacterial cell wall is far more than just a simple boundary or protective barrier. It's an architectural marvel in its own right, a complex mesh of interconnected molecules that maintains the cell's shape, regulates what passes in and out, and provides structural integrity against forces that would otherwise tear the fragile cellular contents apart. Think of it as the hull of a submarine, keeping everything properly pressurized and contained while allowing for controlled exchange with the external environment. Under normal circumstances, this wall is remarkably strong and resilient, capable of withstanding enormous pressures and maintaining its integrity through countless cycles of growth and division. Bacterial cell walls have evolved over billions of years to be tough, flexible, and reliable, the foundation upon which bacterial life depends. They can resist osmotic pressure that would burst cells with weaker walls, maintain their shape under mechanical stress that would deform other structures, and even survive attacks from antibiotics specifically designed to weaken them. But endolysin represents the ultimate lockpick, a molecular tool evolved specifically to dismantle cell walls with surgical precision. It doesn't attack randomly or destroy indiscriminately. Instead, it targets specific chemical bonds that hold the wall together, cutting them with the accuracy of a master jeweler, splitting a diamond along its natural cleavage lines. The enzyme recognizes exactly which molecules to attack and which to leave alone, dismantling the wall structure with minimal collateral damage to other cellular components. As endolysin begins its work, tiny holes appear in the once impenetrable barrier that has protected the bacterial cell throughout its life. At first, these holes are microscopic, barely large enough for individual molecules to pass through. The bacterium might briefly attempt to repair the damage, activating whatever cellular maintenance systems it still controls, but the production of endolysin quickly overwhelms any possible repair mechanisms. The pressure difference between the inside and outside of the bacterial cell is enormous at this microscopic scale, far greater than the pressure difference between the inside of a balloon and the surrounding air. The bacterial cytoplasm, packed with proteins and genetic material and all the molecular machinery of life, exists under pressure that would seem incredible if scaled up to human dimensions. As the holes in the cell wall grow larger, this pressure builds toward an inevitable and dramatic release. When the critical moment arrives, it happens with explosive suddenness that would be visible under a microscope if you happen to be watching at exactly the right instant. The bacterial cell essentially bursts, releasing all of its contents in one dramatic spray that carries with it the dozens of new phages that have been quietly assembling inside. It's like a piñata finally breaking open, except instead of candy, what emerges is a new generation of molecular predators ready to continue the ancient cycle. The moment of bacterial death, violent and sudden though it may be, has a strange beauty to it when viewed from the perspective of evolutionary biology. From one defeated bacterium emerge many viruses, each one a perfect copy of the original invader, each one carrying the same genetic program that has just been so successfully executed. It's reproduction through destruction, creation through consumption, life and death intertwined at the most fundamental molecular level. The timing of this cellular explosion is absolutely crucial to the viral life cycle. If the lysis occurs too early, before the new phages have been properly assembled and prepared, the viral offspring will be incomplete and unable to continue the cycle. If it happens too late, the bacterium might develop defenses, or the cellular machinery might begin to break down, leading to defective viral production. Evolution has fine-tuned this timing over billions of years, optimizing it to maximize both the number and quality of viral offspring. Each newly released phage emerges into the world fully formed and ready to begin its own hunt. They carry with them all the molecular machinery needed to recognize their specific bacterial targets, all the genetic information required to hijack cellular systems, and all the enzymatic tools necessary to complete the cycle of infection, reproduction, and release. They are, in every sense, the ultimate biological weapons, refined by eons of evolutionary pressure into instruments of remarkable efficiency and precision. And so the cycle continues, as it has for billions of years, each successful infection producing a new generation of hunters ready to search for their own prey, each burst bacterial cell releasing dozens of molecular predators into an environment where the next victim may already be drifting within reach. Long before humans walked the earth, before flowers learned to bloom or forests discovered how to grow, before fish swam in seas or birds took to the air, a different kind of life was already locked in an eternal struggle that would ultimately shape every aspect of the biological world. Picture our planet 4 billion years ago, a world so alien it might as well be from another universe entirely. No blue skies stretched overhead, no green landscapes rolled across continents, no familiar sounds of life echoed through valleys or across plains. Instead, the Earth was a harsh realm of volcanic activity and toxic atmospheres, of rocks and chemicals and primitive oceans that bore no resemblance to the life-giving waters we know today. In this hostile environment, where temperatures soared and chemicals that would kill modern life swirled through acidic seas, the first bacteria were learning the fundamental lessons of existence. How to find energy in a world that seemed determined to destroy them. How to survive in conditions that challenged the very definition of habitability. How to reproduce and spread despite obstacles that would seem insurmountable to anything we might recognize as life. These pioneer organisms were nothing like the complex creatures that would eventually inherit the Earth. They had no nuclei, no specialized organelles, no sophisticated cellular machinery. They were essentially bags of chemicals that had somehow learned the trick of self-replication, molecular assemblages that could gather resources from their environment and use them to make copies of themselves. They were life at its most basic and fundamental level, yet they represented one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of the universe. But they weren't alone for long. As bacteria multiplied and spread through the ancient oceans, diversifying into countless different forms and developing new ways to extract energy from their harsh environment, something else appeared alongside them. The first viruses, including the ancestral forms of what would eventually become bacteriophages. These molecular parasites discovered that bacteria made perfect hosts, tiny factories that could be hijacked and repurposed for viral reproduction. What followed was an arms race that has continued for eons, a back-and-forth struggle between parasite and host that has driven innovation on both sides with relentless intensity. It's tempting to think of this as a war between good and evil, between innocent bacteria and predatory viruses, but evolution doesn't recognize such moral categories. Instead, it simply rewards whatever works, whatever survives, whatever manages to reproduce successfully in the face of constant challenges. Bacteria, faced with viral predators that could turn them into unwilling factories for viral reproduction, began to develop defenses, thicker cell walls that were harder to penetrate, immune systems that could recognize and destroy foreign genetic material, the ability to detect viral infections and sacrifice themselves before the viruses could complete their reproductive cycles. Some bacteria even learned to live in communities where individual sacrifice could protect the larger population from viral attack. Phages, meanwhile, responded with increasingly sophisticated attack strategies. They developed better ways to penetrate bacterial defenses, more effective methods for overwhelming cellular immune systems, cleverer techniques for disguising their genetic material until it was too late for bacterial defenses to respond. Some phages learned to integrate their DNA directly into bacterial chromosomes, hiding quietly until conditions became favorable for reproduction. The evolutionary pressure driving this arms race was enormous. Bacteria that couldn't defend themselves against viral attack were quickly eliminated, while viruses that couldn't successfully infect bacteria had no way to reproduce and disappeared just as quickly. Only the most successful survivors on each side managed to pass their traits to the next generation, leading to an escalating cycle of innovation and counter-innovation that continues to this day. This microscopic warfare operated on time scales that dwarf human comprehension. Bacteria and phages can reproduce in minutes or hours under favorable conditions, allowing thousands of generations to pass in the time it takes larger organisms to produce a single offspring. This rapid turnover means that evolution happens in fast forward in the microbial world, with new adaptations appearing constantly and spreading through populations with breathtaking speed. The scale of this ancient conflict is almost impossible to grasp. Every drop of seawater contains millions of bacteria and tens of millions of phages, each one engaged in the same life or death struggle that has defined their existence since the dawn of cellular life. In the oceans alone, scientists estimate that phages kill approximately 40% of all bacteria every single day. That represents trillions upon trillions of individual battles, each one a contest between predator and prey, played out according to rules written in the language of chemistry and physics. Yet this constant warfare serves a crucial purpose that extends far beyond the immediate participants. Viral predation prevents any single bacterial species from becoming too dominant, maintaining the diversity that is essential for healthy ecosystems. Phages act like microscopic gardeners, constantly pruning back populations that threaten to overwhelm their neighbors, ensuring that no single form of life can monopolize the resources available in any particular environment. The relationship between bacteria and phages has also driven many of the most important innovations in the history of life. The constant pressure to defend against viral attack has led bacteria to develop increasingly sophisticated cellular machinery, much of which was later co-opted for other purposes as life became more complex. Many of the fundamental processes that operate in our own cells can trace their origins back to defensive mechanisms first developed in the ancient war between bacteria and their viral predators. Even the evolution of sexual reproduction, one of the most important innovations in the history of life, may have its roots in bacterial attempts to shuffle their genetic material quickly enough to stay ahead of viral adaptation. The ability to rapidly recombine genetic information provides a defensive advantage against parasites that have evolved to attack specific genetic configurations. When humans finally appeared on the scene, we entered this ancient battlefield as relative newcomers, bringing new complexity to relationships that had already been refined over billions of years. We created new environments where both bacteria and phages could thrive, new selective pressures that influenced their evolution, new opportunities for both cooperation and conflict. But we also brought something unique to this ancient war: consciousness and intelligence that could eventually allow us to understand the struggle and perhaps even harness it for our own purposes. The microscopic battle that had been raging since almost the beginning of life itself was about to acquire new significance as human medicine began to search for weapons in the war against bacterial disease. For most of human history, we existed as vulnerable participants in the microbial world, no more protected from bacterial infection than any other animal species, subject to the same harsh rules of survival that had governed life since its earliest beginnings. Imagine a world where a simple scraped knee from playing in the garden could lead to death within days, where the act of giving birth meant facing significant odds of dying from infection, where a minor cough could signal the beginning of the end, where even the smallest cut or wound represented a potential gateway for invisible killers. This was the reality for our ancestors, who learned to fear microscopic creatures they couldn't see, understand, or effectively fight. The relationship between humans and bacteria wasn't always antagonistic. Many bacteria live harmlessly on our skin and in our digestive systems, some even providing benefits like helping to digest food or synthesizing vitamins we need. But pathogenic bacteria, those species that had evolved to extract resources from larger organisms like ourselves, found in humans a rich source of nutrients and a perfect environment for reproduction. Picture medieval cities with their narrow streets, poor sanitation, and crowded living conditions. These urban environments became perfect breeding grounds for bacterial diseases, creating opportunities for pathogens to jump from person to person with devastating efficiency. Plague, cholera, typhoid fever, tuberculosis, these bacterial scourges swept through populations like invisible armies, killing indiscriminately and reshaping the course of human civilization. The Black Death alone killed an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population in the 14th century, fundamentally altering everything from economics to art to religious belief. Entire towns were abandoned, trade routes disrupted, social structures overturned, and all of this devastation was caused by bacteria so small that billions could fit in a space smaller than the head of a pin. Medical practice during these periods was largely helpless against bacterial infection. Doctors had no understanding of germ theory, no knowledge of how diseases spread, no effective treatments for bacterial illnesses. Instead, they relied on theories about imbalanced body humors, bad air, or divine punishment to explain illness and suffering they couldn't comprehend or control. Some folk remedies accidentally provided limited protection. Honey, for instance, contains natural antibacterial compounds that can help prevent infection in wounds. Certain plant extracts have mild antimicrobial properties. But for every treatment that provided some benefit, there were dozens that were useless or actively harmful, and even the helpful remedies were nowhere near powerful enough to deal with serious bacterial infections. Hospitals, ironically, were often among the most dangerous places a sick person could go. Without proper understanding of how infections spread, medical facilities became breeding grounds for bacteria, with doctors and nurses unknowingly carrying pathogens from patient to patient on their hands, instruments, and clothing. The mortality rates in early hospitals were staggering, with many patients dying not from their original ailments, but from infections acquired during their stay. Surgical procedures were particularly hazardous. Even when surgeons managed to complete an operation successfully, patients frequently died from bacterial infections that invaded the surgical site. There was no concept of sterile technique, no understanding of the need to clean instruments or wash hands between patients. Surgery was often literally a matter of life and death, with death winning far too often. The impact of bacterial disease extended far beyond individual suffering to shape entire cultures and civilizations. Populations developed elaborate rituals and social practices designed to limit the spread of disease, often without understanding the scientific basis for their effectiveness. Quarantine practices, dietary restrictions, and social taboos that we now know help prevent bacterial transmission were developed through trial and error over countless generations. Childbirth was particularly dangerous, with puerperal fever killing enormous numbers of new mothers. This bacterial infection, which we now know spreads easily in unsanitary conditions, was so common that pregnancy was viewed as a life-threatening condition. Many women wrote what amounted to wills before giving birth, fully aware that they might not survive the experience. Even minor injuries that we would barely notice today could prove fatal in the pre-antibiotic era. A small cut that became infected could lead to sepsis and death within days. Agricultural societies, where people worked closely with animals and were frequently exposed to minor injuries, lived under constant threat from bacterial infections that could turn any accident into a tragedy. The bacteria, meanwhile, continued to evolve and adapt, finding new ways to spread between human hosts, developing resistance to the limited natural antimicrobials available, and sometimes becoming more virulent as they adapted to human physiology. Some bacterial species essentially co-evolved with human civilization, becoming more efficient at spreading in crowded urban environments or developing new mechanisms for surviving in the human body. Trade and travel facilitated the spread of bacterial diseases across vast distances, allowing pathogens that had evolved in one part of the world to encounter naive populations elsewhere with devastating results. When European explorers brought bacterial diseases to the Americas, the impact on indigenous populations was catastrophic, with some estimates suggesting that up to 90% of the native population died from diseases to which they had no immunity. The psychological impact of living under constant threat from invisible killers cannot be overstated. Entire worldviews were shaped by the reality of sudden, inexplicable death, leading to religious and philosophical systems that emphasized the fragility of life and the powerlessness of humans in the face of forces beyond their understanding or control. We were locked in an ancient war that we didn't understand, fighting enemies we couldn't see with weapons that barely worked. For thousands of years, it seemed like bacteria held all the advantages, and human civilization developed under the constant shadow of microbial death. The idea that we might someday turn the tables on our bacterial adversaries would have seemed like the purest fantasy to our ancestors, who lived and died at the mercy of creatures too small to imagine. Sometimes the most important discoveries in human history happen not through careful planning or deliberate research, but through the kind of fortunate accident that makes you wonder if the universe occasionally decides to give humanity a helpful nudge in the right direction. In 1928, a Scottish microbiologist named Alexander Fleming returned from a pleasant summer vacation to find his London laboratory in a state that would have frustrated most researchers and sent them reaching for the disinfectant. He had been growing bacteria in glass dishes for his research, carefully maintaining cultures of Staphylococcus, a common bacterial pathogen that causes everything from minor skin infections to life-threatening diseases like pneumonia and sepsis. But during his absence, something had gone wrong with his normally meticulous laboratory procedures. One of his bacterial culture dishes had become contaminated with a fuzzy mold that had apparently drifted in through an open window or been carried on air currents from somewhere else in the building. Most scientists would have simply thrown the contaminated dish away in frustration, made a mental note to be more careful about laboratory hygiene, and started over with fresh cultures. Fleming, however, possessed the kind of observational skills that separate truly great scientists from merely competent ones. Instead of immediately discarding the ruined experiment, he paused to examine what had happened, and in that moment of careful observation, he noticed something extraordinary and unexpected. Around the fuzzy mold growth, the bacteria had completely disappeared, leaving clear zones where his carefully maintained bacterial cultures had simply vanished. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience or a failed experiment. This was one of the most important observations in the history of medicine, though Fleming couldn't have known it at the time. The mold, which turned out to be a species of Penicillium fungus related to the organisms that give blue cheese its distinctive flavor and appearance, was producing a chemical substance that could kill bacteria with remarkable effectiveness. Fleming had stumbled upon one of nature's own antibacterial weapons, a molecular compound that had evolved over millions of years as fungi competed with bacteria for resources in soil and decaying organic matter. The penicillium mold was essentially conducting chemical warfare against its bacterial competitors, producing what would eventually be known as penicillin to clear competing microorganisms from its immediate vicinity. The discovery sat quietly in scientific journals for more than a decade, one of those findings that seems obvious in retrospect but was revolutionary at the time. Fleming published his observations and recognized their potential significance, but the technology and resources needed to purify and mass-produce penicillin simply didn't exist in the late 1920s. The world wasn't yet ready for the antibiotic revolution, though it desperately needed one. It wasn't until World War II, when military hospitals were overflowing with wounded soldiers dying from infected wounds, that governments and institutions invested the enormous effort and resources required to turn Fleming's laboratory curiosity into a life-saving medicine. Teams of chemists, biologists, and engineers worked around the clock to solve the technical challenges of growing enough mold, extracting sufficient quantities of active compound, and purifying the result to medical standards. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Soldiers who would have died from infected wounds began recovering rapidly after receiving injections of this new wonder drug. Bacterial infections that had killed millions throughout human history suddenly became treatable with a simple shot or pill. Pneumonia, syphilis, strep throat, infected surgical sites, conditions that had terrorized humanity for millennia could now be cured routinely. The success was so dramatic and immediate that it seemed almost magical. Doctors who had spent their careers watching patients die from bacterial infections suddenly found themselves able to cure diseases that had been death sentences just years before. Mortality rates from infectious disease plummeted virtually overnight. Surgeries that had been impossibly risky became routine procedures. Life expectancy increased dramatically in developed countries as bacterial disease was largely conquered. The psychological impact was perhaps as important as the medical one. For the first time in human history, people began to believe that bacterial infection was a solvable problem rather than an inevitable part of the human condition. The invisible enemies that had shaped civilization for thousands of years suddenly seemed vulnerable, conquerable, manageable. Pharmaceutical companies, recognizing the enormous potential of antibacterial drugs, launched massive research programs to discover new antibiotics. Scientists combed through soil samples from around the world, searching for microorganisms that might produce compounds capable of killing bacteria. Within decades, humanity had assembled an impressive arsenal of antibacterial weapons. streptomycin for tuberculosis, chloramphenicol for typhoid fever, tetracycline for a broad range of bacterial infections. Each new antibiotic discovery was celebrated as another victory in humanity's war against bacterial disease. Medical schools began teaching students that bacterial infections were largely problems of the past, manageable inconveniences rather than life-threatening emergencies. The confidence was understandable and, for a time, seemed completely justified by the remarkable success of antibiotic therapy. Doctors began prescribing antibiotics not just for serious bacterial infections, but for minor ailments, preventive treatments, and even viral infections that couldn't possibly respond to antibacterial drugs. Patients came to expect antibiotic prescriptions as a routine part of medical care, often demanding them even when their doctors knew they wouldn't be helpful. The agricultural industry discovered that antibiotics could promote growth in livestock, leading to widespread use of these drugs in animal feed. Fish farming operations used antibiotics to prevent disease in crowded aquaculture facilities. The substances that had once seemed so precious and miraculous became routine, commonplace, used with the casual confidence of people who had forgotten what life was like before antibiotics existed. We celebrated our victory over the microscopic world with perhaps too much enthusiasm, not realizing that in the ancient war between predator and prey, between parasite and host, evolution never stops working. While we were congratulating ourselves on our conquest of bacterial disease, our microscopic enemies were quietly adapting, learning, and evolving new strategies for survival in a world suddenly filled with antibacterial compounds. The golden age of antibiotics, which had seemed like it might last forever, was actually just the opening phase of a much longer and more complex struggle. The bacteria, it would turn out, were far from finished with their side of the ancient war, and they had some very unpleasant surprises in store for their human adversaries. Bacteria, as it turns out, are remarkably fast learners, and they had been studying the art of survival long before humans ever appeared on Earth. After decades of antibiotic use, something troubling began to happen in hospitals around the world. Doctors started encountering bacterial infections that didn't respond to penicillin the way they were supposed to. At first, these cases seemed like isolated anomalies, unusual situations that could be handled by switching to different antibiotics or increasing dosages. The medical establishment assumed that resistance was a minor problem that could be easily managed with the expanding arsenal of antibacterial drugs. But resistance spread faster and more extensively than anyone had anticipated, moving through bacterial populations with the efficiency of wildfire through dry grassland. Scientists began to understand that bacteria possessed mechanisms for sharing genetic information that made them far more adaptable than anyone had realized. Some bacteria could transfer resistance genes directly to their neighbors through processes that amounted to bacterial sex, passing around genetic adaptations like trading cards. Even more concerning, bacteria could pick up resistance genes from their environment, incorporating genetic material from dead bacterial cells and adding new capabilities to their own survival toolkit. A bacterium that had never encountered a particular antibiotic could suddenly become resistant to it by absorbing the right genetic information from its surroundings. Hospital environments, with their intensive use of antibiotics and constant exposure to sick patients, became inadvertent laboratories for bacterial evolution. These facilities selected for the most resistant bacteria while killing off their more susceptible relatives, creating superbugs that could survive multiple different antibiotics simultaneously. Infections that had been easily treatable with a single drug began requiring cocktails of multiple antibiotics, and even then, success wasn't guaranteed. The most frightening development was the emergence of bacteria resistant to virtually all available antibiotics. Methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or MRSA, became a nightmare for hospitals worldwide. Tuberculosis, which had been largely conquered in developed countries, began appearing in forms that resisted every available treatment. Gonorrhea, once easily cured with a simple shot, developed resistance to drug after drug until doctors were running out of options. These weren't abstract problems confined to medical journals. They represented a return to the pre-antibiotic era for growing numbers of patients. People began dying from infections that should have been easily treatable, and doctors found themselves in the terrifying position of having to tell patients that there was nothing more they could do. The scale of the problem became clearer as researchers began studying resistance patterns worldwide. By some estimates, antibiotic-resistant bacteria could kill more people annually than cancer by 2050, with some predictions suggesting 10 million deaths per year if current trends continue. Simple medical procedures that we take for granted today could become prohibitively risky due to the danger of untreatable infection. Joint replacement surgeries, routine operations that restore mobility to millions of people each year, might become too dangerous to perform if post-surgical infections become untreatable. Chemotherapy for cancer patients, which suppresses immune systems and makes patients vulnerable to infection, could become impossible if bacteria can't be controlled with antibiotics. Even minor injuries that we barely think about today could once again become life-threatening. The problem was compounded by decades of antibiotic overuse and misuse. Patients had demanded antibiotics for viral infections that couldn't possibly respond to antibacterial treatment. Doctors, pressed for time and wanting to satisfy patient expectations, often prescribed antibiotics as a precautionary measure rather than a medical necessity. Every unnecessary prescription created more opportunities for bacteria to encounter antibiotics and develop resistance. Agricultural use of antibiotics created another pathway for resistance development. Farmers discovered that feeding antibiotics to livestock promoted growth and prevented disease in crowded conditions, leading to widespread use of these drugs in animal agriculture. This meant that bacteria in farm environments were constantly exposed to low levels of antibiotics, perfect conditions for selecting resistant strains. The overuse wasn't limited to developed countries. In many parts of the world, antibiotics became available without prescription, leading to inappropriate use and incomplete treatment courses that provided ideal conditions for resistance development. Black markets in counterfeit antibiotics, which often contained incorrect dosages of active ingredients, created additional opportunities for bacteria to develop resistance to sublethal drug concentrations. Perhaps most concerning of all, the pipeline for new antibiotic development began to dry up, just as resistance was becoming a major problem. Pharmaceutical companies found that antibiotics were less profitable than drugs for chronic conditions, since antibiotics are typically used for short periods rather than taken daily for years. The technical challenges of discovering new antibacterial compounds that could overcome existing resistance mechanisms proved more difficult than anticipated. The situation was further complicated by the interconnected nature of modern global society. Resistant bacteria could spread around the world in days through international travel, turning local resistance problems into global health threats. An antibiotic-resistant infection that developed in one country could appear on the other side of the world before health authorities even realized it existed. We had won what seemed like a decisive victory in the ancient war between humans and bacteria, but it turned out to be only a temporary advantage. The bacteria had regrouped, adapted, and were beginning to turn the tables once again. The golden age of antibiotics was ending, and medical science desperately needed new weapons in the fight against bacterial disease. The situation seemed dire, but but it also created opportunities for researchers to think creatively about alternative approaches to bacterial infection. Instead of continuing to rely solely on chemical compounds that killed bacteria, scientists began exploring whether nature itself might provide different kinds of weapons that had been fighting bacteria successfully for billions of years before humans ever discovered antibiotics. In our desperate search for new weapons against increasingly resistant bacteria, scientists began to look more closely at nature's original bacterial killers, the bacteriophages that had been waging successful war against bacteria since the earliest days of life on Earth. The idea of using phages as medicine wasn't entirely new, though it had been largely forgotten in the West during the antibiotic era. In the early 20th century, before Fleming's penicillin revolutionized medicine, some pioneering doctors had experimented with what they called phage therapy. They would isolate viruses that killed specific bacteria and inject them directly into patients, hoping that the phages would hunt down and destroy bacterial infections the way they did in nature. The results of these early experiments were mixed and often confusing. Sometimes patients recovered dramatically, their infections clearing up in ways that seemed almost miraculous. Other times, the treatments appeared to have no effect at all, or even seemed to make patients worse. The science wasn't well understood, the technology for purifying and concentrating phages was primitive, and the medical establishment had little understanding of how to properly apply these biological weapons. When antibiotics became widely available in the 1940s and 50s, most Western researchers abandoned phage therapy in favor of the new chemical drugs that seemed simpler, more reliable, and easier to control. Why deal with the complexity of living viruses that could evolve and change when you could simply give a patient a pill containing a stable chemical compound? But in some parts of the world, particularly in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, researchers continued to study and develop phage therapy throughout the antibiotic era. The Eliava Institute in Georgia became a center for phage research, developing libraries of different viral strains and refining techniques for growing, purifying, and administering these biological medicines. Over decades of patient work, these scientists accumulated valuable experience in using phages to treat bacterial infections. As antibiotic resistance became a global crisis, Western medicine began to rediscover what these Eastern European researchers had been developing all along. Phages offered several compelling advantages over traditional antibiotics that made them particularly attractive as weapons against resistant bacteria. First and most importantly, phages were highly specific in their targeting. Where antibiotics acted like carpet bombs, killing beneficial bacteria along with harmful ones and disrupting the delicate microbial ecosystems that live in and on our bodies, phages were like precision-guided missiles. A phage designed to kill harmful intestinal bacteria would leave beneficial gut microbes completely alone, allowing the body's natural bacterial communities to maintain their healthy balance. This specificity arose from the same evolutionary arms race that had been going on for billions of years. Each phage had evolved to recognize and attack very specific bacterial targets, developing molecular recognition systems so precise they could distinguish between closely related bacterial species or even different strains of the same species. This meant that phage therapy could potentially eliminate harmful bacteria while preserving the beneficial microbes that play important roles in human health. Even more intriguingly, phages could evolve and adapt alongside their bacterial targets. As bacteria developed resistance to particular phage strains, researchers could find or develop new phages that could overcome that resistance. It was like having weapons that automatically updated themselves to stay ahead of bacterial defenses, a dynamic system that could potentially avoid the resistance problems that had plagued antibiotic therapy. The speed of viral evolution, which had once seemed like a disadvantage, now appeared to be a major benefit. Phages reproduce much faster than larger organisms, allowing them to evolve new capabilities in response to bacterial adaptations within timeframes measured in hours or days rather than years or decades. This evolutionary flexibility meant that phage therapy could potentially stay ahead of bacterial resistance indefinitely. Research also suggested that the relationship between phages and bacteria might create what scientists called an evolutionary trap for harmful bacteria. Some studies indicated that when bacteria evolved resistance to phages, they often became more vulnerable to traditional antibiotics. The genetic changes required to resist viral attack appeared to weaken bacterial defenses against chemical compounds, potentially allowing doctors to alternate between phage therapy and antibiotic treatment in ways that prevented bacteria from developing comprehensive resistance. The production of phages also offered advantages over traditional drug manufacturing. Instead of requiring complex chemical synthesis and purification processes, phages could be grown in bacterial cultures using relatively simple biological techniques. This meant that phage therapy could potentially be developed more quickly and cheaply than new chemical antibiotics, making it accessible to healthcare systems with limited resources. Perhaps most remarkably, phages were abundant in nature and constantly being discovered. Every environment where bacteria lived also contained phages that preyed on them, meaning that researchers had access to an essentially unlimited library of potential therapeutic agents. New phages could be isolated from soil, water, sewage, or any other location where bacterial-viral interactions occurred. The safety profile of phages also appeared favorable. Humans had been exposed to bacteriophages throughout evolutionary history without developing diseases from them, suggesting that these viruses posed minimal risk to human health. Unlike many chemical drugs, which must be carefully dosed to balance effectiveness against toxicity, phages could potentially be given in large quantities without harming human cells. Clinical trials began to show promising results as researchers learned to properly purify, characterize, and administer phage preparations. Patients with infections that had resisted all available antibiotics began responding to phage therapy, often showing dramatic improvements that reminded doctors why they had entered medicine in the first place. The ancient war between phages and bacteria, which had seemed like nothing more than an interesting curiosity for most of the antibiotic era, suddenly appeared to hold the key to humanity's future in the fight against bacterial disease. The deadliest viruses on Earth might indeed become our most powerful medical allies. One of the most remarkable and reassuring aspects of bacteriophages is their complete and utter lack of interest in human cells, a specificity so absolute it seems almost designed to put our minds at ease. Remember how exquisitely specific phages are in their targeting, how each viral strain has evolved over billions of years to recognize and attack very particular bacterial species or even specific strains within species. This same evolutionary pressure that makes phages such effective bacterial killers also makes them completely harmless to organisms like ourselves that are so fundamentally different from bacteria that we might as well exist in separate biological universes. The recognition systems that phages use to identify their bacterial targets depend on precise molecular interactions between viral proteins and specific receptor molecules found on bacterial cell surfaces. These interactions are like extremely sophisticated lock-and-key mechanisms, where the phage proteins act as keys that can only open locks found on the surfaces of particular bacterial cells. Human cells are so different from bacteria in their basic structure and surface chemistry that phage recognition systems simply can't detect them as potential targets. It's like trying to use a house key to start a car engine. The fundamental shapes and mechanisms are so incompatible that interaction is impossible regardless of how much force you apply. This biological incompatibility arises from the deep evolutionary history that separates bacteria from more complex organisms like humans. Bacteria and our own cells diverged from common ancestors billions of years ago, so long ago that they've had ample time to develop completely different approaches to basic cellular processes. Where bacterial cells are relatively simple, with their genetic material floating freely in the cellular fluid, human cells are incredibly complex, with nuclei, mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, and dozens of other specialized structures that bacteria simply don't possess. The size difference alone makes interaction unlikely. Human cells are typically 10 to 100 times larger than bacterial cells, vast by comparison to the microscopic scales on which phages operate. Even if a phage somehow managed to attach to a human cell, it would be like a motorcycle trying to refuel from an oil tanker. The scales are so mismatched that the mechanisms simply wouldn't work. But size is only one aspect of the incompatibility. The molecular machinery that phages use to inject their genetic material and hijack cellular systems is specifically adapted to bacterial biochemistry. When a phage injects its DNA into a bacterial cell, it relies on finding ribosomes, enzymes, and other cellular components that work in very specific ways. Human cells have analogous structures, but they operate according to different rules and use different molecular languages. It would be like a computer programmer writing software for a Windows computer and expecting it to run on a completely different operating system that uses different programming languages, different file formats, and different hardware architectures. The basic concept of computation might be similar, but the specific implementation details are so different that the software simply won't function. We encounter billions of phages every day in the most intimate possible ways without experiencing any harmful effects whatsoever. They're present in the water we drink, the food we eat, the air we breathe. They live on our skin in enormous numbers, inhabit our mouths, and populate our digestive systems alongside the bacteria that make up our normal microbial communities. Our immune systems, which are exquisitely sensitive to potential threats and quick to respond to foreign substances, don't even bother to mount responses against phages because they pose no danger to human cells. This peaceful coexistence has been going on throughout human evolutionary history. Our ancestors were exposed to phages long before they developed agriculture, built civilizations, or invented medicine, yet there are no records of diseases caused by bacteriophages in humans. If phages were capable of harming human cells, we would expect to see evidence of phage-related illnesses in historical medical records, but such evidence simply doesn't exist. The safety of phages in medical applications has been demonstrated repeatedly in clinical trials and therapeutic uses. Patients have been given enormous quantities of phages, billions or even trillions of individual viral particles, without experiencing adverse effects related to the viruses themselves. The only side effects typically observed come from bacteria dying and releasing their cellular contents, which can temporarily trigger immune responses as the body clears away bacterial debris. In fact, phages may already be providing health benefits that we don't fully appreciate or understand. The viruses that live naturally in our bodies probably play important roles in maintaining the balance of our microbial communities, preventing harmful bacteria from becoming too numerous while allowing beneficial species to thrive. They may act as microscopic gardeners, constantly pruning back bacterial populations that threaten to become dominant and maintaining the diversity that characterizes healthy microbial ecosystems. This natural regulatory function could explain why some people seem more resistant to bacterial infections than others, and why disrupting the normal microbial balance with broad-spectrum antibiotics sometimes leads to secondary infections by opportunistic bacteria. The phages that normally keep these opportunistic species in check may be collateral victims of antibiotic treatment, allowing harmful bacteria to flourish in the absence of their natural viral predators. Recent research has even suggested that the phages living in our bodies might communicate with our immune systems in subtle ways, helping to train our defenses to recognize genuine threats while ignoring harmless microbes. This would make phages not just passive passengers in our microbial communities, but active partners in maintaining health and fighting disease. The extraordinary safety profile of bacteriophages makes them uniquely attractive as therapeutic agents in an era when antibiotic resistance is making traditional treatments increasingly dangerous and ineffective. Here, finally, is a class of antibacterial weapons that can be used without fear of harming the patients they're meant to help. Biological missiles so precisely targeted that they eliminate only their intended victims while leaving everything else untouched. The relationship between phages and bacteria represents one of the most elegant and instructive examples of evolution in action, a 4 billion-year-long arms race that continues to drive innovation and adaptation with relentless intensity. For eons beyond human comprehension, these two groups of organisms have been locked in an evolutionary dance of action and reaction, adaptation and counter-adaptation, with each advance by one side spurring new developments by the other. It's a biological Cold War where the weapons are molecular and the battlefields are measured in nanometers, yet the stakes could not be higher. Survival and reproduction in a world where only the fittest innovations persist. When bacteria develop new defensive strategies, phages evolve new ways to overcome them with the inexorable patience of geological time. When phages develop new attack mechanisms, bacteria respond by upgrading their protective measures, creating biological security systems that would impress any cybersecurity expert. This cycle has been repeating for so long that both sides have become extraordinarily sophisticated, developing capabilities that push the boundaries of what seems possible at the molecular level. Consider some of the remarkable innovations that have emerged from this ancient conflict. Bacteria have developed immune systems that can recognize and destroy viral DNA with surgical precision, cutting out foreign genetic material while leaving their own chromosomes intact. These bacterial immune systems, known as CRISPR-Cas systems, have become so sophisticated that human scientists have co-opted them as tools for genetic engineering, using bacterial antiviral defenses to edit genes in everything from laboratory mice to agricultural crops. In response to these bacterial immune systems, phages have evolved countermeasures that would make any intelligence agency proud. Some phages can disguise their genetic material by modifying the chemical tags that bacterial immune systems use for recognition, essentially carrying molecular false passports that allow them to slip past bacterial border controls. Others overwhelm bacterial defenses with sheer numbers, launching coordinated attacks that saturate immune systems and allow some viral genetic material to slip through. Some bacteria have developed the ultimate defensive strategy, cellular suicide. When these bacteria detect that they've been infected by a phage, they essentially blow themselves up, destroying both the bacterium and the virus before viral reproduction can be completed. This kamikaze approach protects the bacterial community at the cost of individual survival, a form of biological altruism that demonstrates how evolution can favor group benefits over individual interests. Phages have their own counter-strategies for dealing with bacterial suicide systems. Some viruses can disable the cellular self-destruct mechanisms before they can be activated, while others work so quickly that they can complete their reproductive cycle before the bacterial cell realizes what's happening. Still, others have learned to work in teams, with different phage types specializing in different aspects of the infection process. The speed of this evolutionary arms race is breathtaking by the standards of larger organisms. Because bacteria and phages can reproduce in minutes or hours under favorable conditions, thousands of generations can pass in timeframes that barely register on human scales. This rapid generation turnover means that evolution happens in fast forward in the microbial world, with new adaptations appearing constantly and spreading through populations with viral efficiency, quite literally. In the case of phages, the genetic mechanisms that drive this rapid evolution are themselves products of the arms race. Bacteria have developed systems for rapidly shuffling their genetic material, creating new combinations of defensive capabilities faster than their viral enemies can adapt. Some bacteria can even incorporate genetic material from their environment, picking up resistance genes from dead cells and adding new capabilities to their survival toolkit. Phages, meanwhile, have evolved their own genetic flexibility, with some viral species capable of extremely high mutation rates that allow them to explore new evolutionary possibilities at breakneck speed. Others maintain libraries of different genetic modules that can be mixed and matched to create new attack strategies, like biological Swiss Army knives that can be reconfigured for different purposes. This natural arms race offers tremendous hope for medical applications because it means that phages represent a renewable and constantly updating source of antibacterial weapons. When bacteria develop resistance to one phage strain, scientists can search for or develop new viral variants that overcome that resistance. The evolutionary pressure works both ways, ensuring that neither side can achieve permanent victory. Even more encouragingly, some research suggests that bacterial resistance to phages comes at a cost. The genetic changes required to resist viral attack often make bacteria more vulnerable to other stresses, including traditional antibiotics. This creates opportunities for combination therapies where doctors could switch between different types of treatment, trapping bacteria in evolutionary catch-22s where resistance to one threat increases vulnerability to another. The arms race also drives innovation in ways that benefit both sides. Bacteria that survive viral attacks often become more robust and resilient, while phages that successfully overcome bacterial defenses become more efficient and effective. This constant pressure for improvement has produced some of the most sophisticated molecular machinery in the biological world, systems so elegant and efficient that human engineers are only beginning to understand how they work. Perhaps most remarkably, this billion-year conflict has created a kind of biological balance that maintains diversity and prevents any single species from becoming too dominant. The constant pressure from viral predators ensures that bacterial communities remain diverse and dynamic, while the evolution of bacterial defenses drives viral innovation and prevents phages from becoming so efficient that they eliminate their own food sources. The ancient war continues with no end in sight, and that might be exactly what both the microbial world and human medicine need. As long as bacteria and phages continue their evolutionary dance, there will always be new weapons in development, new strategies to explore, new possibilities for harnessing natural biological warfare for human benefit. In a world where antibiotic resistance threatens to return us to a pre-antibiotic era, the ongoing arms race between phages and bacteria represents hope, proof that nature has been solving the problem of bacterial infection for billions of years, and that those solutions are still being refined and improved with each passing generation. The return of phage therapy to modern medicine has already produced some remarkable success stories that offer glimpses of what might be possible when ancient biological warfare is properly harnessed for human healing. Consider the extraordinary case of a patient whose chest cavity had become infected with Pseudomonas aeruginosa, one of the most feared and formidable bacteria in the entire microbial world. This particular organism has earned its terrifying reputation through sheer tenacity and resourcefulness. It's naturally resistant to most antibiotics, can even survive treatment with alcohol-based hand sanitizers that kill most other microbes, and has an almost supernatural ability to establish persistent infections that resist every conventional treatment. The patient had suffered for years with an infection that had become the medical equivalent of a siege, with bacterial forces entrenched so deeply in the chest cavity that no antibiotic assault could dislodge them. Multiple courses of the strongest available drugs had been tried and failed. Surgical interventions had provided only temporary relief before the infection returned with renewed vigor. The medical team was running out of options, and the patient was facing a future of chronic illness and potentially life-threatening complications. It was at this desperate point that doctors decided to try something that would have seemed like science fiction just decades earlier. They introduced thousands of carefully selected bacteriophages directly into the patient's chest cavity, along with antibiotics that the bacteria had previously resisted with ease. The treatment was precisely targeted, using phages that had been isolated specifically for their ability to hunt and destroy Pseudomonas aeruginosa. The phages went to work immediately, seeking out their bacterial prey with the focused intensity of molecular bloodhounds. But this wasn't simply a matter of viral predators overwhelming bacterial defenders through superior numbers. Instead, something far more sophisticated and strategically elegant began to unfold. The phages didn't just kill bacteria, they systematically dismantled the bacterial community's defensive strategies. Within weeks of treatment, something remarkable happened that demonstrated the true potential of phage therapy. The bacterial infection began to weaken not just from direct viral assault, but in ways that made the bacteria vulnerable to treatments that had previously been completely ineffective. The antibiotics that had failed repeatedly began to work again, as if the phages had somehow disabled the bacterial resistance mechanisms that had protected the infection for so long. The patient, who had exhausted every conventional treatment option and was facing a grim prognosis, made a complete recovery. The infection that had dominated their life for years simply vanished, cleared by a combination of ancient viral predators and modern medicine working in perfect harmony. It was a victory that demonstrated not just the power of phage therapy, but the potential for combining biological and chemical weapons in ways that amplified the effectiveness of both approaches. This case illustrates one of the most promising aspects of modern phage therapy, its ability to work synergistically with existing treatments rather than simply replacing them. The phages didn't just attack the bacteria directly, they weakened bacterial defenses in ways that restored the effectiveness of antibiotics that had become useless. It's like having molecular special forces that can breach enemy fortifications, allowing conventional weapons to finish the job. Clinical trials around the world are now producing similar success stories with increasing frequency. Patients with infections that had resisted every available antibiotic are responding to carefully designed phage cocktails, often showing improvements that seem almost miraculous to doctors who had run out of conventional options. Burn victims with infected wounds, cystic fibrosis, patients with chronic lung infections, surgical patients with post-operative complications, all are beginning to benefit from treatments that harness 4 billion years of evolutionary warfare. The precision of modern phage therapy represents a quantum leap forward from the crude attempts of the early 20th century. Today's researchers can rapidly identify the specific bacterial strains causing an infection, screen libraries of phages to find the most effective viral predators, and even engineer new phages with enhanced capabilities for specific therapeutic applications. Advanced purification techniques ensure that phage preparations are free from contaminating bacteria and other microorganisms that might cause side effects. Quality control measures that would have been impossible in earlier eras guarantee that each dose contains exactly the right number of active viral particles, properly formulated for maximum effectiveness and stability. The delivery methods have become sophisticated as well, with researchers developing ways to target phages to specific body tissues and protect them from immune system clearance long enough to complete their antibacterial mission. Encapsulation technologies can shield phages from stomach acid, allowing oral administration for intestinal infections. Aerosol formulations can deliver phages directly to lung infections in patients with respiratory diseases. Perhaps most exciting are the early results from combination therapies that use multiple phage strains simultaneously, creating cocktails that can attack bacterial infections from several directions at once. These multi-phage treatments can overcome bacterial resistance more effectively than single-strain therapies, while also reducing the likelihood that bacteria will develop comprehensive resistance to the entire treatment. The regulatory challenges that once seemed insurmountable are gradually being addressed as medical authorities develop new frameworks for approving biological therapies that can evolve and adapt. The complexity of working with living medicines that change over time is being met with equally sophisticated regulatory approaches that ensure safety while allowing for the flexibility that makes phage therapy unique. Manufacturing capabilities are expanding rapidly as biotechnology companies invest in facilities designed specifically for phage production. The techniques for growing, purifying, and formulating these biological weapons are becoming standardized, creating the industrial infrastructure needed to make phage therapy widely available. Most importantly, the medical community is beginning to understand how to properly deploy these ancient weapons in modern healthcare settings. Training programs are teaching doctors how to select appropriate phages for specific infections, how to monitor treatment progress, and how to combine phage therapy with other treatments for maximum effectiveness. These early victories represent just the beginning of what promises to be a revolution in infectious disease treatment. As our understanding of phage biology improves and our technical capabilities expand, the potential applications for therapeutic phages seem almost limitless. The deadliest viruses on Earth are proving to be among our most valuable allies in the fight for human health. As we look toward the future, the prospect of fully harnessing nature's most ancient and successful biological warfare system seems both thrilling and profoundly humbling, offering possibilities that stretch the imagination while remaining firmly grounded in billions of years of evolutionary reality. The current renaissance in phage therapy represents only the earliest phase of what could become a complete transformation in how we approach infectious disease. Researchers are developing increasingly sophisticated techniques for discovering, characterizing, and engineering bacteriophages that go far beyond simply finding viruses that happen to kill particular bacteria. Modern biotechnology is beginning to unlock the deeper secrets of viral biology, creating opportunities to design custom phages with capabilities that surpass anything found in nature. Imagine personalized phage therapy where doctors could quickly identify the specific bacterial strains causing a patient's infection and then select or design phages perfectly matched to those particular organisms. Instead of broad-spectrum treatments that affect many different types of bacteria, medicine could become increasingly precise, targeting only the harmful microbes while leaving beneficial bacterial communities completely untouched. The speed of this process is already becoming remarkable. What once took weeks or months of laboratory work can now be accomplished in days or even hours using automated systems that can screen thousands of phages against specific bacterial targets. Artificial intelligence is being deployed to predict which phages will be most effective against particular infections, while machine learning algorithms help optimize treatment protocols based on accumulated data from thousands of previous cases. Engineering capabilities are advancing even more rapidly, with scientists learning to modify existing phages or create entirely new ones with enhanced properties. These designer viruses could be programmed to be more stable under different storage conditions, more effective at penetrating bacterial biofilms, or more resistant to bacterial defense mechanisms. Some researchers are even exploring the possibility of creating phages that can deliver therapeutic genes directly to bacterial cells, turning the viral infection process into a tool for genetic medicine. The delivery methods for phage therapy are becoming increasingly sophisticated and targeted. Researchers are developing nanoparticle formulations that can protect phages from immune system clearance while directing them to specific tissues or organs. Smart delivery systems could release phages only when they encounter certain chemical signals that indicate the presence of bacterial infection, ensuring that the viral weapons are deployed only where they're needed. Combination therapies represent perhaps the most promising near-term development in phage medicine. By carefully orchestrating the use of multiple phage strains along with traditional antibiotics, immunotherapy agents, and other treatments, doctors could create therapeutic strategies that are far more effective than any single approach alone. These combination protocols could trap bacteria in evolutionary catch-22s, where resistance to one component of the treatment increases vulnerability to another. The manufacturing and quality control challenges that have historically limited phage therapy are being systematically addressed through advances in biotechnology and process engineering. Large-scale bioreactors specifically designed for phage production are becoming more efficient and reliable, while automated purification systems ensure consistent quality and potency. Standardized testing protocols are being developed to characterize phage preparations with the same rigor applied to traditional pharmaceuticals. Perhaps most exciting are the preventive applications that could emerge from advanced phage technology. Instead of waiting for infections to develop and then treating them, future medicine might use phages proactively to maintain healthy microbial balance and prevent harmful bacteria from establishing themselves in vulnerable patients. Surgical patients could receive phage treatments before operations to eliminate potential pathogens, while immunocompromised individuals could use phage prophylaxis to reduce their infection risk. The agricultural and environmental applications of phage therapy could be equally transformative, offering alternatives to chemical pesticides and antibiotics in food production. Phages could be used to control bacterial diseases in crops, reduce the need for antibiotics in livestock, and even clean up environmental contamination caused by harmful bacteria. These applications could help address the growing problem of antibiotic resistance while reducing the environmental impact of chemical antimicrobials. Global health initiatives are beginning to recognize the potential of phage therapy to address infectious disease challenges in resource-limited settings. The relatively simple production requirements for phages compared to chemical antibiotics could make effective antimicrobial therapy more accessible in developing countries, while the specificity of phage treatments could help preserve beneficial bacteria that are important for nutrition and immune function. The regulatory frameworks governing phage therapy are evolving rapidly, as authorities around the world grapple with the unique challenges of approving biological medicines that can evolve and adapt. New guidelines are being developed that recognize the special properties of phages while ensuring appropriate safety and efficacy standards. International cooperation is increasing as countries share data and coordinate approaches to phage regulation. Training and education programs are expanding to prepare healthcare providers for the phage therapy revolution. Medical schools are beginning to include phage biology in their curricula, while continuing education programs help practicing physicians understand how to integrate these new tools into their clinical practice. Professional societies are developing guidelines and best practices for phage therapy applications. Research into the fundamental biology of bacteriophages continues to reveal new possibilities for therapeutic applications. Scientists are discovering phages with unusual properties that could be exploited for medicine, viruses that can penetrate biofilms more effectively, phages that work synergistically with immune system responses, and viral strains that retain their effectiveness even against highly resistant bacteria. The economic implications of widespread phage therapy adoption could be substantial, potentially reducing healthcare costs while improving patient outcomes. The development of phage-based treatments could create new biotechnology industries and provide alternatives to expensive antibiotic development programs that face diminishing returns due to resistance issues. Looking even further into the future, the integration of phage therapy with other emerging medical technologies could create possibilities that seem almost science-fictional today. Combination treatments that use phages alongside gene therapy, immunotherapy, nanotechnology, and regenerative medicine could address not just bacterial infections, but a wide range of diseases and medical conditions. The ancient war between bacteriophages and bacteria, which began billions of years before humans existed, may ultimately become one of our most powerful tools for ensuring human health and well-being. The deadliest viruses on Earth, those microscopic predators that have been perfecting their lethal skills since the dawn of cellular life, are poised to become our greatest allies in the ongoing struggle against infectious disease. As antibiotic resistance threatens to return us to a pre-antibiotic era, the solution may not lie in developing ever more powerful chemical weapons, but in learning to harness the biological weapons that nature has been refining for eons. The future of medicine may depend on our ability to recruit these ancient warriors to fight on our behalf, turning the oldest war on Earth into humanity's newest hope. And so, we arrive at the end of our gentle journey into the microscopic world of biological warfare, where the smallest actors perform the grandest dramas and where death and life dance together in patterns too intricate for the eye to see. We've wandered through battles invisible to human perception but vast in their implications for every living thing on Earth. We've met warriors so impossibly small they challenge our understanding of existence itself, yet so sophisticated in their lethality that they humble our greatest technological achievements. We've seen how the deadliest viruses on our planet wage their ancient war not for conquest or glory, but simply because 4 billion years of evolution has shaped them into perfect molecular machines designed for one precise purpose. From the geometric perfection of viral architecture to the elegant precision of molecular hunting, from humanity's desperate search for new medicines to the humbling realization that our salvation might come from our planet's oldest and most successful predators, we've traced the quiet drama that unfolds every moment in spaces too small to imagine, yet too important to ignore. Tonight, as you settle into sleep and let your thoughts begin to drift like phages through the liquid spaces of dreams, perhaps you'll carry with you a new appreciation for the invisible ecosystem that surrounds and supports all life. The bacteria and viruses that dance their eternal dance in every drop of water, every breath of air, every surface you touch, Maintaining balances we're only beginning to understand, while offering solutions we're only learning to appreciate. Consider the remarkable fact that right now, on your skin and in your body, billions of these ancient warriors are quietly going about their work, maintaining the microbial balance that keeps you healthy, fighting battles you'll never see on your behalf, serving as guardians you never knew you had. They ask for nothing in return, these microscopic protectors, yet they may hold the key to medicine's future. There's something deeply peaceful about knowing that even in the face of antibiotic resistance and emerging superbugs, nature has already provided solutions in the form of predators that have been solving the bacterial problem since before life learned to breathe oxygen or see sunlight. The same evolutionary forces that created the challenges we face have also created the tools we need to overcome them. And if you found any peace in this microscopic odyssey, if the wonders of the viral world helped quiet your mind and ease you toward rest, if the ancient stories of molecular warfare somehow made the universe seem both more complex and more comprehensible, we'd be honored if you joined us for more gentle explorations of science's greatest mysteries. The war between phages and bacteria will continue long after humans have forgotten about it, long after our species has either learned to harness these ancient weapons or found other ways to solve the problems they address. But tonight, in this moment, you can rest knowing that some of the smallest things in the universe are working with some of the greatest purpose, maintaining the delicate balance that makes all life possible. Thanks for joining us here at Sleep Science, where we explore the fascinating complexity of existence in ways that help your mind unwind and drift toward dreams. Sleep well, knowing that even in the tiniest scales of reality, there is beauty, purpose, and endless wonder waiting to be discovered.